When it comes to detailing our designs, detail components have their advantages and disadvantages for the different annotation methods that we typically use in Revit. Let's take a look at that by zooming in at this wall section. And here at the top of the wall, there are 3 detail components. One makes up this repeating detail on the outside of the wall, and then there are 2 detail components here, and they're both 2x6s. What I'd like to do is begin by using the first method, which is just using text. Using text means you can come up here to annotate and then select on text. Then pick one of these options that has an arrow right next to it. Then click on one of the detail components. In this case, I'm going to pick this top plate. Click again, and then I'll keep this really simple and just type in 2x6. In this case, on the type selector list, we have a wide variety of font sizes we can choose from. And I'm choosing 3/32 off of the list so it has the proper size for this note. Now I'm going to click out here in space to finish off the command, and then hit escape a couple times on the keyboard. There's 2 main drawbacks to using text. It really relies on a manual input, and it can lead to inconsistencies throughout your project should you note it one way in one view and then note it a different way in a different view. Also, if you use text, this arrow will not stay automatically with this object should it move. So should this object move from one spot to another, you can see that the arrow is still stuck in place, and then you'll need to adjust that arrow so that it's pointing at the right object. In this case, I want to bring it back, so I'll come up here and then select on the undo command to bring that 2x6 back to its previous location. Other than text, we have 2 other options for noting this. One way is called a tag, and we could do a tag by category. In this case, I'll click once, and now I'll drag this question mark on over. Now, the reason why it's given us a question mark is that the default note has not been put into this object. What it's trying to reference is what's called a type mark, and currently the type mark has been left blank. I'm going to hit escape a couple times on the keyboard to get out of this selection, and if I click on this object and then click on edit type, we'll see that the type mark is currently blank. If we typed in a piece of information, such as 2x6, and then click on OK to that, we'll see that it now populates with that piece of information. Now, the interesting thing about this is if we select on it and then try to move it to another location, we can see that the note will move along with it. Also, if we try to place that note in a different location, and we have another 2x6 down here at the bottom, what this is going to allow us to do is when we tag it, we can see it's 2x6. So you can begin to see why people start to like tags. They'll follow this around should it ever move, and it'll standardize what that note should read. We'll come right back to that in just a minute. Now there's a third way that we can do this by what's called a keynote. If we select on the keynote tab, and we're going to do an element keynote. If I click right here, come over and click, right now we have a standardized keynote for this element. And I'm going to hit escape a couple times to get out of the command. Right now, this number would refer to a chart that'd be somewhere else. It'd be under drawings, you'd be able to reference it. But this is just because of the kind of keynote that we used. If we select back on this keynote again and come over here to the type selector list, we can see that there's an option here called keynote text. If we select on that, we can see that this as well is reading 2x6. Also with keynotes, if this part should move around, you can see that that note will move around with it as well. Now, with keynotes, as well as with tags, there's one thing to know. And that is if you have a repeating detail component, they don't act all that well. What I mean by that is if I try to do a tag by category now, and then select on where this is at, right now we can see that the repeating detail is highlighted, and I click, I once again get that question mark. If I try to do the same thing with the keynote, an element keynote, click, come over, it's going to give us a menu saying we need to pick off of the menu what that keynote should read. And I'll just click on cancel to this. What happens is with a repeating detail component, neither your keynotes or your tags work. They just don't know what that should be. So there's a very good chance you might need to go in there and just use standard text with an arrow in order to finish that off. My current method is to use the tag or keynote as much as possible, and then just tag or keynote everywhere. Then, if I ever run into a condition like this, that's where I'll use my text, click, come over, and then type in whatever piece of information it is that I want. The rule of thumb on this is either use a keynote or a tag to tag just about everything that you possibly can in the Revit project. And then if it's something like a repeating detail, there's not much more that you can do other than using pieces of text, doing your arrows, and then typing in the piece of text. Realize, though, that that's going to take a little bit more manual effort, but all in all, it's a lot faster to use either tags or keynotes to very quickly note almost everything inside of your Revit project, and then come back and use text as opposed to just using text everywhere, and then also risking typing in something wrong or not being consistent with your notes throughout the entire project.